Right now you are touching, reading, or printing something that traces back to a single research lab most people have never heard of. The mouse under your hand. The way your screen shows overlapping windows instead of a single block of text. The printer sitting in an office down the hall. All three ideas came out of one building, inside one company, before 1975. In 1970, Xerox opened that lab in Palo Alto and gave its scientists almost no rules. No product deadlines, no reporting to the copier division, just a mandate to invent the office of the future. One of the researchers, Alan Kay, had already sketched an idea in a 1972 paper, a computer small enough to carry, built for one person instead of an institution. He called it the Dynabook. Kay imagined a computer a child could carry to school, use to draw, write, and learn, entirely under that child's own control. In 1972, no hardware existed that could do any of it. The vision came first. The lab spent the rest of the decade building pieces of a machine that could eventually catch up to it. Over the next few years, the people inside that lab built things nobody outside it had ever seen. A computer called the Alto, with a graphical screen, icons, and overlapping windows. A pointing device to control it, redesigned into the shape every mouse still has today. A way to connect multiple computers over a single cable called Ethernet. A laser printer. A word processor that showed exactly what would print on the page, years before anyone called that feature WYSIWYG. Building a single Alto cost Xerox tens of thousands of dollars. The company built close to 2,000 of them over the next several years, mostly for internal use, and a handful of research universities, and never sold one to the public. Xerox owned every piece of what would become personal computing, roughly a decade before most of the world had ever touched a computer. This isn't a story about a missed opportunity. Xerox didn't miss anything. Xerox built it, patented pieces of it, and then mostly ignored it. Because the company generating billions of dollars a year selling paper copiers had no internal reason to care about a computer that cost less than one of its machines. Some of Xerox's own senior scientists pushed the company's leadership to build a real computer business around what PARC had created. That push ran into resistance from an executive team whose entire career had been built on selling copiers, not computers. The men making the decisions had spent decades succeeding at one business, and it was hard for them to bet that business on a different one. Part of the distance was physical too. Xerox's headquarters ran a corporate structure built entirely around a leasing and sales model for office copiers. The Palo Alto lab sat 3,000 miles away, staffed by computer scientists who had never sold anything in their lives. The two sides of the same company barely spoke the same language, let alone shared the same priorities. 9 years after that lab opened, the company built entirely around Xerox's ignored idea walked through the front door and asked to see it. In December 1979, Xerox agreed to let a small group of engineers from a 3-year-old computer startup tour the Palo Alto lab. The deal had already been signed weeks earlier. Xerox's venture capital arm invested $1 million in Apple, which was preparing for its stock market debut. In exchange, Apple got 2 visits inside a research lab most of Xerox's own employees had never been allowed into. Some of the scientists inside PARC were reportedly unhappy about the arrangement. Watching a team from an outside startup walk through years of unreleased work in a single afternoon. Their objections didn't change the outcome. The deal had already been signed at the corporate level, far from the lab itself. The engineers who walked through PARC that day worked for Steve Jobs. What they saw was the Alto, running Windows, icons, and a mouse exactly the way modern computers still do. Several engineers who were there later described it as the moment they understood a computer screen didn't have to be a blank space for typed commands. Apple had already been building its own computers, the Apple II among them, using text commands typed on a blank screen. Nothing at Apple looked anything like what was running in that lab. Jobs pulled some of Apple's best engineers off other projects and put them entirely onto rebuilding Apple's next computer around a graphical, mouse-driven design. It was an enormous bet for a company that had built its entire identity and its only real product on a computer that worked nothing like it. That project became the Lisa, released in 1983. The Lisa itself struggled. Priced at nearly $10,000 and slower than expected, it sold poorly in its first 2 years on the market. The idea Apple had seen at PARC hadn't yet found the right price or the right machine to prove itself. Jobs discussed the PARC visit publicly for years afterward, calling it one of the most important days of his career. Xerox executives rarely discussed it at all. Xerox had let its own future walk out the door for $1 million. This is the detail that makes the story worse for Xerox, not better. Xerox didn't even lose the race to be first. The Xerox Star reached the market in 1981, 2 years before the Lisa and 3 years before Apple's cheaper machine, running the same kind of graphical interface Apple's engineers had seen at PARC. Xerox beat Apple to market with the exact technology Apple would later get credit for inventing. A single Star workstation cost close to $17,000. Xerox's sales force had spent years selling copier leases to corporate purchasing departments. Selling a $17,000 computer required an entirely different kind of sales conversation, aimed at a different buyer, and Xerox never fully retooled the team to have it. Xerox marketed the Star to its own existing customers, corporate offices that already leased Xerox copiers. Total sales over the product's life stayed in the tens of thousands of units. Within a few years, Xerox quietly discontinued it, refocusing the company on the copier and printing business it already understood. A cheaper, faster version of Apple's idea followed in January 1984, the Macintosh, priced under $2,500. Apple didn't launch it quietly. During the Super Bowl that January, Apple aired a commercial directed by Ridley Scott, introducing the computer to millions of viewers who had never heard of a mouse or a graphical screen at all. Within weeks, journalists who had never covered a computer launch were writing about a desktop few of them had ever seen in person. Same idea, same lab of origin. One version cost as much as a car and sold to a few thousand offices. The other cost as much as a used car, launched with one of the most talked about commercials in television history, and sold to millions of people. Xerox had the technology first. It didn't have a reason, inside its own organization, to treat a $2,500 computer as more important than a printer and copier business generating billions in annual revenue. Apple had no copier business to protect. A cheap computer wasn't a threat to anything Apple already sold. It was the entire company. Even Apple's own first attempt struggled. The Lisa cost too much and moved too slowly to reach many customers. It took a cheaper machine, a different launch, and one unforgettable commercial for the idea PARC had built to finally reach the audience it was always capable of reaching. Xerox didn't lose the personal computer to a smarter competitor. It lost it to a company with nothing to protect. Apple risked a market Xerox couldn't risk touching, because Apple's entire future already depended on it. Xerox's future depended on paper. The lesson isn't that the biggest company always misses the biggest idea. Xerox never missed it. Xerox's own scientists handed the future to their guests, invented and proved and running on a screen, before anyone else even knew what to build. Having the idea first has never been enough. Someone still has to be willing to bet the whole company on it. Xerox already had a company. That was the problem.